Yeah, so I kind of went overboard with the whole need something harsher thing that I said at the end of the last video. I could have taken a smaller jump to like Resident Evil or Alan Wake, or just something that didn't give me heart palpitations around every corner. I remember as a teeny tiny little baby, learning about Outlast and how it was the scariest game to ever exist, begging and pleading my mother to get me PS Plus since it was one of the free games back in 2014, and booting it up, just to get tossed out of a window, shit my pants, and never touch the game again. It's taken me over 10 years to finally get over my fear and find, honestly, one of the best horror games I've played in a very long time. Just the sheer amount of degradation and deformity found in the people and the asylum itself really makes the experience perfect for about the first 85% of it. When we arrive, learning that we are essentially a freelance reporter doing this to uncover some sort of truth about what is going on here and having to go through literal hell to do so, it's just great. It makes sense as to why we are the most vulnerable people in the world. No fighting back, no punching, no kicking, no gun, just good old fashioned feet on the floor and hiding anywhere we can scrunch our fucking thick, juicy dump truck into. The closest we come to ever really hurting anybody is when we crush some dude with an elevator. It makes for a much more harrowing experience. Creeping around corners, listening to what might be around them, leaning against the wall with our camera in hand, peering down what feels like an endless hallway looking for any movement. Just hoping something isn't around the corner or can't hear you plopping your way through water. Trying your hardest not to be seen while flipping switches, turning on generators, or turning valves. It's not a game of fighting back or hitting them harder than they can hit you, but a game of cat and mouse with chase sequences that honestly left me dreading being caught by any of the big baddies we ended up coming against. The music's immediate drop from spooky ambiance to loud, gut-wrenching, tense string and drums while you're being talked to by whoever is chasing you honestly makes me think, next year, I need a heart rate monitor. Fear is one thing when you can blast someone away with a shotgun, but it's a whole different beast when you have nothing. The amount of paranoia I felt on a constant basis that something was lurking behind me, or the relief I felt when narrowly escaping the grips of an assumedly deformed Chris Walker or Richard Traeger and his massive fucking scissors, or we just gotta squeeze a little bit of religious fuckery in there because it's bound to happen. The religious portion of the game is probably the most tame portion, aside from the whole, like, ghost thing, but I don't really want to talk about that. I didn't really like that. Father Martin is just some religious weirdo. Now, I'm not saying that all people who are religious are weirdos, but look at this shit. He just burnt himself alive. He's kind of comforting in a weird way, because he's not trying to kill us. He even appears for like a split second in the DLC, riding to drop down the pit, which is where we see some guy going fucking nuts about dropping down, giving directions to both the people we play as. Chris, you know, the humongous one we meet at the very beginning, and around a couple portions of the game, it's relatively fucking stupid, but horrifying nonetheless, while Traeger has to be one of the most intelligent, quote-unquote bosses we have the displeasure of meeting. Chris is easy enough to hide from, right? Only checking one of the two lockers, and his inability to squeeze into small spaces, but having him plop behind you at a crazy pace for something his size, especially in water, it's just... ugh. But I have to say, the one that by far made me the most uncomfortable, as probably most of you, is Eddie Glueskin, aka The Groom. Not only does this motherfucker feel like the smartest bit of AI, I'm getting upset thinking about it. Not only does this motherfucker feel like the smartest bit of AI in the entire game, he can open doors without busting them down, but he dies in probably the most horrific way for both us and him. Honestly, after every interaction we have with this man, I will never be the same again. I've been cuffing my balls for the last week. Traeger is very lighthearted and isn't as menacing when speaking to you, as he's actually quite eloquent and goofy when it comes to the ways he wants to murder you. But fucking Gloobert over here is chasing us around, asking us to be his wife and calling us pet names while singing songs and ranting about how all women are the same. Like, this is coming from a man that tried to force some dude to have a kid with him. Like, he just doesn't understand that this doesn't fucking work. Walking through his failed experiments and seeing as every wife he has had has been strung up and hung exactly like he tries to do to us, the entire situation is just incredibly fucked up and honestly left me genuinely uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to play anymore kind of uncomfortable. I was a little creeped out when we got our fingers chopped off, but being on a fucking table saw, butt-ass naked, I really didn't know how they were going to top themselves from the weird shit that we experienced in the base game, but the DLC is somehow like 200x. But while on the topic of said DLC, I want to take a small detour to talk about my personal favorite part of the entire overall story, including both, and that is how they take place at the exact same time as the main game. So of course, Whistleblower, we are whistleblowing, right? It makes sense. Didn't know that going in, but the name made so much more sense. We send the email, blah-de-blah, we are tortured, but while in that captivity is when the asylum goes full apeshit, and everything goes tits up. I originally expected to have the story of Whistleblower end with Miles' arrival, but the first thing that sort of tipped me off to that not being the case is one very specific voice line. It immediately rung bells in my head that we were in captivity long enough to be here at the exact same time. Two people, a whistleblower getting evidence to destroy the mess that was made, and an investigative journalist getting evidence to expose the Murkoff Corporation and take it down in that way. Honestly, with what I found out about Murkoff through both games, I'm not fucking speaking out against shit. I'm too much of a piss baby for that. Having it end the way it does with us stealing Miles' car while he lurks not far behind after being possessed by the Wall Rider, now that gave me goosebumps. Alongside all of the creepy voices, the gore, the darkness, and Red Barrel's ability to make us rely on a finite resource, being our camera and the batteries we pick up throughout the game, it brings me back to how I originally felt about the survival horror before that thing. Being that we have to use it sparingly, they made this thing, seemingly unimportant, become an extension of our arm, and honestly one of the best things they did with this is make us lose it. The entire game we are taught to hold on to this with our life, and every time we even come close to losing it or are kidnapped, the first thing we look for is our camera. Hell, even Waylon, as soon as he can, he grabs one. It's our eyes where it's too dark to see, using infrared to see what lurks where the human eye can't see. In my opinion, has to be one of the best ways a video game ever permanently attaches you to an inanimate object. But to circle back around, we lose it, it seems to be gone, but we can't progress without it. Now I thought, damn, that shit fucking gone. We gotta play the rest of the game going through in the dark, like everyone else, and trying to stay where we can see more than 3 feet ahead of us. But they make us turn around and pick it up, and once we do, it's broken. It's not like horrible, and honestly, it's like a cracked phone screen that after a certain amount of time, your brain just tunes out, but it's cracked for the rest of the game, obscuring a teeny tiny part of it, but just enough to make it feel like you're seeing a lot less. Also in the moment, we turn around and holy shit, we're being followed by 4 people. They even use the camera to include some scary moments that you wouldn't see because it's far too dark. If we didn't have the camera and just spun around and walked to the nearest light source, we wouldn't have had the moment in the prison section where you hop up and shit yourself because you're nose to nose with some dude.
Yo, bro, who got you smiling like that?
I also had a feeling deep down inside that with the whole green hue and obviously lower resolution when using the camera, that it would take away a lot from the gore and the atmosphere, which it admittedly does because that's the nature of using infrared. You're not being shown the guts just on display, but the fact of not seeing shit without it, it doesn't take away from anything. And trying to use it when any sort of light comes knocking, it just flashbangs you, and that means that you're seeing what you're supposed to see, and it's unapologetic, fuck you, look at my cock and balls form that you do. As the game came out in 2014, it definitely holds up. I'm not going to run around singing praises for the visual of the game, except that I am. Not only has this thing aged like a fine bottle of that sweet, sweet bee booty nectar, but the amount of disgusting things they crammed into this game that just further add to the feeling of queasiness. Ugh. I did have the occasional funny texture, and I can remember me saying, oh well, that doesn't look right, but nothing that stood out or had any lasting effect that I can think of the time when it was egregious or even remember when it happened. I did feel like there was this bit of a camera graininess the entire time, but with it being over the entire game and not just in certain areas where things are maybe a little bit more intense when it comes to texture overload, that they made it more of a narrative and spooky decision than one made out of necessity. I feel like this also applies to the layout of the asylum in general. When I originally tried to play it, but pissed myself when Chris grabbed us, I thought the game was going to be a lot more open than it ended up being. The game is surprisingly linear, with a little sprinkle of freedom of where to go and what to explore. But that freedom at the end of the day is a complete lie. It seems like you can go anywhere if you just have the right key or know how to get there, and there's a lot to explore and look at that isn't necessarily a part of the main story, but we aren't walking around the asylum freely, and it kind of feels like it's meant to be that way. You see the big old bitch chasing you around in the main hall, you find a way out, and then you just don't go back to that area. Seeing those very drastic changes in the areas we are being hunted in, from a more livable administration point of the asylum where we enter, to a dilapidated, falling apart prison, obviously unkept for multiple years, where people are locked in padded rooms with blood all over the walls, trying their hardest to get out of there, and are obviously violent, because 2 of them want to kill us. Then if I'm not getting the order messed up in my head, we are down in the sewers, which I never felt the sewers were really super scary to begin with, since I feel like sewers are meant to be scary. Like, big media is like, oh, spooky. It's just a labyrinth that's under and around the asylum, and it does what it says on the tin. It's a sewer with water and shit, but now we gotta talk about the last 30 minutes of the game. Being outside, we see the first bits of the wall rider, like, properly, which I will say, it's just not scary. I don't find ghosts really all that horrifying, but we are just in an open courtyard running around looking for a place to get back into the building, to explore a theater, then to go even deeper underground where we thought we were going to finally escape out the front door. This is personally where I think the game's design and scares take the sharpest turn, and it's for the worse. It's very technological and futuristic, which is not really what I want to explore while running away from a ghost with a 6-pack. I think Whistleblower handled this area a whole lot better. Of course, during main game, we watch Chris get fucking obliterated, but we see doctors and agents getting killed by the asylum patients, and we see how it all went down. It's such a darker and deeper despair when we play as Wayland compared to Miles. While walking these halls as Miles, it feels empty and unlived in comparatively to what we see as Wayland. It's been 10 years of horror. Well, I mean, technically 11, but it's 10 for me. You know what? Fuck you. Honestly, I've never been more upset that it took me so long to play a game. It's not like I haven't owned it for the last 10 years, but I've bought it multiple times and on multiple platforms, and could never get myself to play it. And now while writing this and waiting for my food to be ready, I want to play it again. I've never been so enthralled by a horror game. Don't get me wrong, Resident Evil gives me tons of fun and I do want to keep playing those games, and so does Silent Hill, but Outlast, alongside what other game, stand on the top of the mountain for me like the badasses they are. And was honestly the reason I got into horror to begin with as a little piss baby. That game is
This is a first-rate town, but all you ever notice are the ways it stretched too far. And it has been knocked down, while some of us are still left here between the scars.
Not only has this thing aged like a fine bottle of that sweet, sweet boot. Why did I write this?